Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Childcare Confidential, the podcast where we pull back the curtain a little bit on what really happens in early childhood education in all the states. So, we focus a lot on Indiana because that is where we are based with our childcare centers. However, we do incorporate all the states because we like to know what is going on in early childhood throughout our country. I am your host, Jessica Hampton. And before we dig in today, you may notice that I am missing my amazing co host, Katie Dink. She is taking a much deserved week off to rest and recharge. And honestly, good for her. In this field, burnout is real, and we are modeling what we preach. It is important to take that time for yourself and for your family. So make sure you are modeling what you preach. So today you get me a solo episode. So this is one that I have been waiting for a minute, but I'm really into regulations. If you know me personally, you know that I'm a rule follower. You tell me what you need and I got you. But I need to know what you need. And so I'm really big on understanding the why behind things. So I like to know why the rule is in place. Well, y'all, in Indiana, we're going to focus on Indiana for this one today. There are several different types of licensing. I know. Today we're going to talk about it because a lot of families, policymakers, and just general business owners and things like that in the community do not really understand the different types of regulations. So, not all childcare in Indiana or in the country is regulated the same. And believe it or not, the difference makes more important matters than what you actually think. So, the difference is very, very important. So let me start with maybe just a simple question. When a parent is considering childcare, do they assume that every program in their state is regulated the same? Do they assume that every program has the same safety rules? Do they assume as a new parent that maybe every program in their state or in Indiana, which is our state, has to follow the same ratios? Or maybe they have to have like the same fire inspectors come out and do fire inspections. Or maybe every program should have to follow the same playground standards or same staff training requirements. Most families would say, absolutely, yes. All of the programs should be regulated the same. Parents should be able to expect the same. And many, many families and policymakers do not understand that that is not the case in a lot of states. As I was getting into this field, I started as a licensed in-home. And then I went on to be an unlicensed registered ministry, which are all the registered ministries in Indiana, or a licensed childcare center. And that was the third thing we ended up becoming. But we walked through it and I realized how different the regulations were. And as I would give tours and different things and talk to different people, I realized that a lot of the families do not realize that there are different regulations. So even if a place is allowed to operate and have childcare, it does not mean that we are all regulated the same. We do not have to meet the same basic safety standards. So here's the truth. In Indiana, there are at least 4 different regulatory systems for childcare. 4, y'all, 4. And they range from extremely rigorous to shockingly minimal. And the wild part, to every parent that drives past each one of these schools or they click on their website, these programs often look exactly the same. So, how would a parent know that it's different without actually knowing anything about our field? It's not out there publicly very often. I haven't seen any info flyers. So, let's walk through this in a really clear way. Okay. In Indiana, we have licensed childcare centers. This is what our school is. We have 2 schools in Indiana, and they are fully licensed by the state. You can then go on to get different quality ratings beyond that. But we're just talking about basic licensing standards. That's where licensing is in the state. And then on top of that, we have quality rating standards and national accreditation and things like that. But we're just talking about the basic safety standards right now. So our schools are licensed childcare centers. They're fully licensed by the state. This means that we have to follow certain child to staff ratios. We do have fire marshal inspections. We have to do monthly fire drills. We have to have, and this is kind of surprising because we are the only regulatory system like this in Indiana, but we have to have commercial playgrounds. So that is why you see some schools have to have playgrounds that look like your parks, commercial playgrounds. If they do not have a commercial playground in the state of Indiana, they are not a licensed childcare center, even though they may be in a commercial building. I know that my old neighborhood had a commercial building close to it, and it was actually one commercial looking building, but it was licensed as 4 different in-home child cares because it had certain safety walls. So people are getting around all of these rules in different ways. But if it does not have a commercial playground with required fall safety zones, it is not a licensed childcare center. Could be something else, but not a licensed childcare center. We also have director qualifications and ongoing staff training for our licensed childcare centers. We also have unannounced inspections. I thought that was very key too, because as a licensed in-home, now I don't know if this is still the case or if this happened with everybody, but as a licensed in-home, my inspector did call me and tell me when they were coming. So that whole unannounced inspection thing never happened for me as a licensed in-home. They would call and make sure you were home and that you were coming. That does not happen in licensed centers. They just show up. I've not once gotten a call saying they were coming out to a licensed center in Indiana. But my in-homes, I did. Do not know that that's the case for everybody, but it did happen for me. And then just a real enforcement authority. So we do have real regulations that we have to follow. And often we're kind of learning the regulations as we go because things will change, and the licensing heads in Indiana do not feel the need to let us know. So that has happened more than once to us as a school, where we find out after the fact because they did not feel the need to let us know. So have fun with that. Moving on to licensed childcare homes. These are still licensed, but these are home-based providers who are fully licensed. So the interesting thing in Indiana, which is not in most often other states, to be a licensed in-home in Indiana, you did not have to live in the home until this year. So that is different than a lot of other states. A lot of other states, you already had to live in the home. But that is how, like I was explaining, the childcare center close to my old neighborhood had 4 licensed in-homes in one building. They were able to do that because in Indiana, you did not live in the home. Now, all of those in-homes that people already are not living in are grandfathered in. But you can't start a new in-home without living in it now. So keep that in mind, but that is a new rule for Indiana. And honestly, it makes sense. All the other states were doing it. I know everybody feels a different kind of way about it, but in my opinion, having a licensed center, if you are out doing business in a building that looks like a commercial building, you should probably have to follow all of the same regulations that a licensed center should. And Indiana was letting homes get around that for a very, very long time. That does not mean that it was right. That was not a thing in most other states. So in that way, we actually are putting some things in the right, I feel like, even though we are struggling with so many other things. Moving on. Home-based providers that have licensed in-homes do have to follow capacity limits. Theirs do look different. They have like an overall capacity, and depending on how many infants and toddlers they have, how that kind of matches up with, they have a little chart they follow, but how many kids they can have. A licensed in-home can have 12 or fewer children. Unless they're a class 2, which is a whole nother thing we're not going to go into today because that's just like a extra bump in their licensed in-home. But we won't go into that today. They do have to follow the fire safety rules. There are a lot of fire safety rules as a licensed in-home. I had to go through that too. You have to make sure things are labeled, whether it is in your home or not. They do have to follow background checks, and for everybody in the home. I think that is important. And honestly, if my child was in a licensed in-home, I would ask to see the background check of everybody in the home to make sure those were done, because you want to make sure safety above all. And they do have health inspections regularly. They have inspectors that come out and do check on the homes regularly. They do have playgrounds or fenced-in areas, but those do not have to have commercial equipment. You can have the little tyke sets and things like that. So that is nice because that is a cost that in-homes, hear me in-home providers, because I know I'm ruffling some feathers right now, but hear me because I hear a lot about how licensed centers get reimbursed more for different things than in-homes. There are reasons. In-home providers do not have to provide commercial playground equipment. Licensed childcare centers do. Each one of my playground shades cost me $5,000. Try to buy a slide under $10,000. You know, we can't buy the $250 little tyke set. We have to go big with all the things because of the regulations that the state has put on us. And this is another argument later down the road with people saying, well, you know, maybe the state lowered rates and did all this with these subsidy payments so that providers, licensed centers, would charge less. Well, the state also put all these regulations on us that we have to pay for, so we can't charge less. So the state really should have been informed about actual costs before doing subsidy cuts like that. But that is on another tangent. So moving on back, homes, love you, love you, love you. However, we do have to pay for more regulations because of the state as a center. And I say that from my heart, from being an in-home provider, from being a registered ministry provider, and from being a licensed center provider. I really do. There are so many more regulations. And I feel for licensed in-homes because now you have people that are not licensed coming in and trying to charge what you do as a licensed in-home, having to follow all of those regulations that you already do. So I feel for you too in that situation. Let's move on to registered childcare ministries, because I know in true Jessica fashion, I went off on a little tangent. So let's get on with where things really, really start to change, because there are a lot of similarities between licensed childcare centers and licensed childcare homes. There are a lot of similarities. This is where things change, people. Unlicensed registered ministries. These are not licensed. They are registered, usually through a church or a religious organization. They are typically nonprofit, 501c3 organizations. I do know some providers that will rent from a church to be able to use their 501c3 and their space and to be unlicensed. But there's a lot of different things around that. There's space requirements as a licensed center that we have to follow that registered ministries do not have to follow. And so maybe the space that they are in, it's not adaptable, things like that. So I do understand some situations for different things like this. But I'm not here to judge. I've been one of each. I totally get it. However, I think this does point out in Indiana that we need to get some more regulations across the board that are the same. So for registered childcare ministries, they are exempt from a lot of licensing rules, but they do have to have some sanitation inspections, and they also have to get a fire marshal approval. So that is good. But let's talk about what they often do not have. They do not have, as just a basic unlicensed registered ministry, all the registered ministries, they do not have to enforce any age-based ratios. They do not have to enforce staff education requirements, ongoing training requirements. Full health program oversight is not there. And they do not have to deal with any playground standards as far as commercial playground or in-home playground setups. They operate under a much lighter regulation system. Some things that I've noticed from having both, and this has been a while ago, but we did not have to have smoke detectors in every room as a unlicensed registered ministry. We didn't have to have fire extinguishers every so many feet. Licensed childcare centers do have to have commercial kitchens with special qualifications, which seems just unrealistic because, let's be honest, we're not doing culinary masterpieces. But another regulation that is put on licensed centers that does not have to be followed by other regulatory systems in Indiana. So there are quite a few as far as classroom sizes and square footage. There's a lot more leniency on other regulatory licensing. And last but not least, our fourth one, which I do not honestly know a whole lot about. Let me just be upfront with that. And again, this is all in my opinion and what I have found through my research in my experience and on the good old state website. But for legally licensed exempt providers, these are not licensed and not registered. They have the lowest level of oversight from the state. They can accept childcare vouchers, and they get a basic eligibility inspection to do that. But otherwise, no ratios, no playground standards, no fire marshal approval, and no training requirements. And a lot of these can be found in other buildings too, like maybe your public schools. There are some public schools that do have licensed centers in them, but a lot are legally licensed exempt. So what qualification is the public preschool down the road actually following? It is important to know and understand, because from my experience in the field, they are not following the same regulations that the licensed childcare center is. So all things to keep in mind, especially with where our funding is going. Not every program needs the same amount of funding. Okay. But basically with the legally licensed exempt providers, as long as they had smoke detectors and running water, they were basically good to go. So here's the part that may truly keep you up at night. All 4 of these settings, all 4, the licensed centers, the licensed in-homes, the unlicensed registered ministries, and the legally licensed exempt childcares, can legally care for infants, toddlers, preschoolers. That is the most vulnerable humans on the planet. And these little humans are not protected by even the same rules. Let me give you a real example. Okay. In licensed centers, the infant classroom is capped at 4 babies per 1 teacher. Well, actually, now I think rules just changed without even telling the providers, but I do believe it went up to 5 babies per 1 teacher. But please double check with your licensing provider and do not take my word for that, because I would not want to steer anybody the wrong way on that. But we cap them at lower ratios because why? Science tells us that infants need constant supervision, that we need to be safe sleep monitoring, and infants have individual schedules. So there's a lot of work to do. But what about in an exempt setting? We cap our ratios, but there may be no ratio requirement at all in an exempt or an unlicensed registered ministry setting. It could be 1 adult, 8 infants, 10 toddlers. Still legal. Still legal, y'all. You could have an in-home that's not licensed up to 7 children now in Indiana. That's crazy. Let's talk playgrounds for a second. Licensed centers. Remember, they have to have those commercial playgrounds, the ones you see at the park. So they have to have shock absorbing surfaces, first of all. Also, fall height calculations are enforced. Equipment is spaced out. We can't have the same equipment, and we have to have it positioned in a certain area because you have to have fall zones that are pretty large because of head injuries. I mean, it's real. You're taking care of children. But in exempt care, none of that's required. No fall surfaces, no fall height calculations. Not worried about how the equipment's spaced, because if a child's swinging and another child just wants to run in front of them, well, accidents happen. A child can legally play on the equipment or the concrete if they're legally exempt. And then there's fire safety too. Licensed centers have to have fire marshal approval, evacuation plans posted in every classroom, monthly drills, and commercial exit standards. That's all the lighted signs you see. In exempt care or unlicensed registered ministries, smoke detectors would be great. That's all. That'd be great. Now let's talk about the elephant in the room, okay? Because this isn't just a safety issue. It's an equality issue. Licensed providers like me pay for inspections, we upgrade buildings, we install playground surfaces, we hire credentialed staff, we maintain training systems, and keep ongoing training moving forward. And then we compete in the same market with programs that don't have to do any of that. Same families, same tuition conversions. I have seen people unlicensed and everything else trying to charge over $200 for their home childcare. Y'all, our preschool rate isn't much more than that. Call your providers, your licensed childcare centers, your PAS to quality level 4s, your in-homes that are PAS to quality level 4, your ministries that are level 4, the ones that are really working hard to to make sure they're following everything they can. Make sure you do your due diligence. Know that there's different ways of regulating things. We're competing with people that don't have to follow all of these rules. And so for a rule follower like me that gets subsidy cuts that are insane, it is really hard to do your job. In fact, I'm doing it without pay because it's more important for me to follow the rules and make sure the kids are safe and our staff is appreciated and still have a job than it is to take a paycheck. And not everybody can do that. So I think that it is important that we really look at, if we need to cut costs, we really have to go back to the board and say, what regulatory costs across the board need to go away? Or what do we need to bring up so that everybody is on the same page, so that it is a fair market? Because we cannot compete in the same market with the same families, the same tuition conversions, the same waiting lists, but wildly different regulatory costs. Families don't even know that there's a difference a lot of the times. You can explain it on a tour, but I bet when they go into other schools, they're not explaining it if they're one of those programs. They're not saying that, there's no sign that says this program is exempt. No, you have to find the license on the wall and kind of read it for yourself or ask the questions. Ask the questions. So let me say this very, very clearly. Licensing is not just red tape. I've had times where I have been so excited to have licensing, have my back and all of these things, and times where I have looked at them and been like, have you lost your mind? What is happening? But they are not just red tape. Licensing really is injury prevention, fire prevention, abuse prevention, disease prevention, and some accountability. We need accountability, right? Licensing exists because the ratios, making sure background checks are done, playgrounds are safer, buildings are inspected and made sure they're safe for kids, and that staff are trained to know what they're doing. Licensing is our infrastructure. It makes sure that children are protected. And when we allow for completely different safety systems, we are quietly saying that some children deserve more protection than others. And that's exactly what we're saying with the subsidy cuts that are happening too. That some children deserve a better education than others. That some children deserve more protection than others. We're teaching this to our babies, our youngest of learners. How is that okay? So what do we do with all of this? I think first, we need to do some call to action. I think families deserve transparency. I think that no matter which way you are licensed, whether that's a licensed center, a licensed in-home, a unlicensed registered ministry, or you're legally licensed exempt, I think that you need to tell families what you are and why you chose that path to licensing, because there's got to be a reason. And I think you should put that out there. There were times when I was an in-home or a ministry or a sender, and I did explain to families like why I chose that. Maybe it was the setting at the time. Maybe it was where we were at with our business and things that we could do. There are reasons. So make sure you explain that to families, and parents need to just really ask the questions. Look for the license too. Make sure you know whether you're going into the public preschool or not. Ask the questions, because just because it's in a public school does not mean that it is the best choice. Also, let's make sure that policymakers hear this. I'm not saying that every program should look identical, but what I am saying is that every child deserves a basic safety plan. Like basic safety is, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We need to start with basic safety. And we don't have that across the board in Indiana. And so we do need to come together a little bit more on that, no matter how that looks, whether it's less regulations and getting rid of, maybe the commercial kitchen that is not needed, or the commercial playground that might not be needed, or maybe it's more regulations to level the playing field. Something has to be done because children deserve a basic safety plan, like basics. Safety should not depend on a legal loophole. It blew me away when I first learned that a licensed in-home could be in a commercial building in Indiana. That was never a thing where I grew up. I grew up in Michigan. That was never a thing. I was shocked, or shook, as I like to say, and my friends love to make fun of me for. I was shook that was actually a thing in Indiana. So I know that people that have come up in this and have learned the regulations, they're like, what do you mean? That's normal here. But from somebody coming from out of state in, it was very surprising to see that you could have a licensed in-home in a commercial building. So I think that first we need to make sure that we are just following the same regulations, and that you should not be able to have a legal loophole to get around regulations. That's taking the short way out. We don't do that as educators and providers. And then, make sure that you're speaking into your team and other providers as well, because fellow providers, listen to me. Your work, it matters. Your compliance matters. Doing the right thing, even when it's hard, matters. Trust me. Your investment in what you've done in this field, and the money and the time and the sweat and the tears that you have poured into your early childhood school matters. You matter. Your voice matters. And the field only changes when we start speaking out and start talking about it. I would hope that you would hear my heart on this hard conversation about licensing regulations. It is not aimed at any different licensing regulation, compliance agency. It's not aimed at whichever way you chose to get licensed. There's a reason for it. It's not aimed at anyone directly. It is just, we need to start talking about these things. We need to open our eyes and, let parents know that, hey, this is happening. Because as a parent, I wouldn't have known. They're not in our field. They don't see our world every day. So we need to make sure that people know. So if this episode resonated with you, please share it. Send it to a parent. Send it to a legislator. Send it to someone who thinks the same as childcare. Somebody who cares about the children and what is happening in our country and our states. Because our children, our kids, they deserve better. And the subsidy cuts that are happening and different things like that, they deserve better than that. We can do better, and they deserve better. So there is my spiel. I am sure we will talk more in depth about different licensing regulations down the road, because this is definitely something that I am very, very, very passionate about. And Katie not being here kind of gave me a way to really get involved in this. So thank you so much for listening. And I hope you have a wonderful week. And then next week, we shall return. And it seems like all my tech glitches are okay this week. But hopefully Katie will be back with us next week, and she would have so much to say about this. Love you, Katie. Miss you. Everybody have a great week. See you soon.